Hey everybody, so I'm going to speak to this whole anti-vax, pro-vax debate. It's ramping up, you guys. It's ramping up. If you're anti-vax, now you must pay attention. I'm not trying to scare anybody, but you are seeing now the sides of both the anti-vax and the pro-vax becoming louder and louder. The drums are beating louder and louder. Now, you should be concerned, and I'll tell you why. Because unless you're doing jilly juice, you are going to fight against what you think is an infringement on your constitutional right as a person trying to take care of their own health. So there's this article that I saw on my newsfeed, and people are scared, but they should be, because they don't know how to take care of themselves. They're so afraid of all the preventative methods that they don't know how to actually understand they have recourse. Okay, so this is on CNN International, actually CNN actually. It makes me so angry. My parents thought they were doing the right thing. They were persuaded by the anti-vaxxers. Okay, you guys are anti-vax. You better listen carefully. This anti-vaxxer's adult son recently experienced measles. Now he has this message for everybody. So now here's the thing. He came into this world mutated, okay? He never was exposed to the measles like he was living in a bubble. He wasn't exposed to a measles party. He wasn't exposed to the vaccine. And so now he's an adult. And he's probably, yes, he's mutated. He's getting older. So that measles, whether he was exposed to it or he had the antibody that came to surface and then it became more inflammation, they are now going to blame somebody for giving him the measles because he never had the antibody in his body, supposedly, to go after. Now, we don't know if he actually had the antibody that then multiplied through his exposure to other sets of measles. We don't know. See, this is where it gets so fucked up, because we don't know if it's a different strain that he caught, or if he already had the antibody, but it's a different strain, so it looks like measles, but it's just a different strain. It doesn't even matter. So now the outcome of this specific situation, because what they're doing is they're blaming the people who aren't vaccinated, that he was never vaccinated, so now he's suffering this type of manifestation, a disease, and they're going to make a direct correlation that if you are vaccinated, you wouldn't suffer this type of outcome. But like I said, everybody brings different things to the table with different exposures. There's 24 strains of measles out there, and who knows which one he came in contact with, which then stemmed into this article that is now going after the anti-vaxxers. So now you guys have no leg to stand on, considering how they're positioning this information. Now you can try to say, oh yeah, okay, he got exposed to one of the 24 strains of measles, so he may have already had the antibody. He may have already been exposed to the measles in some way, but it got a different strain. But since he never got the vaccination because he came from an anti-vax family, that's all the proof that they need. They're not going to talk about actual natural, or not natural, but where you're exposed to somebody in your community where you can get the antibody. Did they even talk about, did he get a titer test to show that he had one or two antibodies? Maybe he did. Maybe his body didn't have all of the antibodies of that specific strain to show that he was immune, but he got exposed to then a different strain of the measles, of which then is giving him a platform, an argument. Okay, so here's the thing. So this is what somebody's saying. So this is from this lady that who's very afraid of the mandatory vaccinations. For those of you who aren't up to date with politics or anything, yesterday there was a Senate meeting. They were discussing mandatory vaccines on a federal level, meaning every adult and every child will be forced to take all the vaccines. You won't even be able to say no to the flu shot. They haven't decided their final answer yet. There's still 9 days left for them to come up with an answer. Even if you don't have kids, you should be worried. I'm not. This is our First Amendment that they're trying to take away. We will no longer have medical freedom if they decide to mandate vaccines. This is serious, guys. It will no longer be pro-vax, anti-vax decision anymore because everyone will be forced. They talk about how to enforce it for adults. Denying adults their ability to renew their driver's license, professional license, and hunting, fishing license was suggested. Believe it or not, this bill is and will affect every single American family, not just the anti and ex-vax families. Here's how you can call and help and everything, okay? Do not consent to mandatory vaccination. Let's say this is true. Let's say this is true. Of course, they don't know. See, here's the thing. The reason why they're even putting out the vaccines to begin with is because we don't know what people bring to the table. We don't know. We don't know. And so now they have to then cater to the lowest common denominator. They have to basically put everybody on the equal playing field, say, hey, we don't know what you're bringing to the table. We're not going to titer test everybody. If you do a titer test and prove antibodies, then hey, great. If it qualifies for their specific regulations that they have. You're supposed to have so many, or supposed to test positive for this antibody and that antibody. And they'll tell you, I mean, hey, if you're supposed to have the measles and flu strain and this and that, and they will give those lists of things. Holy crap, I know. Well, you go get a titer test and see where you are on that spectrum, and then now you have a choice between a homeoprophylaxis, a regular vaccine, or a measles party with somebody that had the measles recently. Okay, and then you prove, and then you obviously give them, if you have to prove it for whatever reason, then you give them the information. That's if we get to that point. I'm not saying that we are, but that's your. So here's the thing. So just because you got a vaccine, it doesn't mean that you're going to die. Now, I know this is scary for some of you who don't even want to, and I don't like vaccines either. I don't like needles. But if it comes down to that, if it comes down to, in order for me to renew my license, that I have to be vaccinated in these areas, no, I'm not going to like it. No, I'm not going to like it. But I have recourse. I have recourse. Because it's like this. I mean, it's public health is so crazy. It really is, because we can't legislate morals. They're trying to figure out how to keep everybody on a level playing field. So when someone is at a major disadvantage, highly mutated, that someone who isn't vaccinated, that has an antibody that will then protect them, right, and go after those pathogens, they aren't going to pass around some really crazy type of aggressive disease that could potentially take out a mutated person. Yeah, that person that's very mutated, it really should be up to them to reinforce their own body and vaccinations or whatever to protect them. But no, they're saying, hey, since we don't know what they're bringing to the table, we're going to just completely give everybody the same thing, and then now everybody is equal. Okay, yes, and then people may die. The reason why you would die from these vaccines is because you're bringing to the table mutations that has already weakened your body, not your immune system, because if you have a strong immune system, then you have a weak body. So if you never get sick, and you're not on J juice, and you're mixing in with the population, you have an overactive immune system, which is exactly the baby of the industry. They want to see people who never get sick, that are not doing, when they're not doing J juice, of course, but they want to see people never getting sick, highly vaccinated, full of antibodies. But what happens is that does turn into cancer, disease, and chronic illness, and rapid aging, and then eventual death. But they're not worried about what the eventual outcome is. The system is only worried about the here and now. Can you prove protection for one, which is antibodies? And then then of course you're going to have to, if you think that these vaccines are going to kill you, then you got to prove why it is that you shouldn't get them. Which means that if you're already immunocompromised, if you already have a bunch of diseases, and if you get a vaccine, it's going to put you over the edge, that would be a medical exemption. If you can prove that you are medically exempt from taking vaccines. If you're not proving that you're medically exempt, then yes, you got to take them. See, that's what it comes down to, because they can't legislate morals. We can't force people to eat healthy and understand how the body works. So we have people highly mutated, highly pathogenic, highly whatever, and then they get exposed to different diseases. And so that's how they're figuring this stuff out. But no matter what, if they force the vaccinations on you, no matter what, it doesn't even matter. Drink the J juice, because what happens is you drink the J juice after you've proven that you've been vaccinated, it'll dilute the antibodies so it doesn't wreak havoc on your body and cause autoimmunity and potential cancer, disease, and chronic illness. And then it doesn't also do the rapid aging. Because the more that they're going to be forcing the vaccinations on you, the more that you have to fight back to then dilute the antibodies. But at least now you have the antibody, whether you get it in the environment from a person that you met on the street, that you happen to maybe eat at a restaurant where someone didn't wash their hands and they passed on the norovirus to you, or you get it in a vaccine, it doesn't matter. You're getting the antibody, and now you have recourse. Okay, so this fear, which I get the fear because people don't know how to counter and keep the balance of antibodies, yeast, and hormones in their body. So they're afraid of every single medical procedure, and they should be, because they're not aware of how to counter it. When you are ignorant, you're going to be fearful of everything that's out there, and you're not going to understand the reasoning behind why they're doing this. So this guy in this CNN article that suffered from the measles, well, yeah, he got exposed to a strain of the measles. Now, there's 24 different strains, but he is blaming his parents for not vaccinating him. He's never been vaxxed for the measles. And he's probably not on J juice, so he probably never was exposed to any measles until now recently. And so now he suffered because his body is weak. When you have a long healing process, when you're sick for like a month, when you're sick for a long period of time, it's because your body isn't strong enough to repair the mutation. Not just fight it off, but repair the mutation. So the longer that you're sick, the more mutated you are. See, when I was sick a year ago, when I got exposed to a pathogen when I was at Dr. Phil, because I was on 8 different airplanes and then hanging out in LA around everybody and their mother and eating out, I'm sure I was exposed to a pathogen, and being around kids. I went to Northern California to visit people with kids. So who knows where I picked up that pathogen that caused then me to be sick right after I came back. But I was only sick for a month. And I fixed that mutation, that upset of homeostasis. Some people were sick for 3 or 4 or 5 months. When you're sick for that long, that's a sustained mutation. See, that's the difference. So no matter what, you're supposed to get sick if you're around pathogens. But it's the amount of time of recovery is the difference of sustaining a mutation or reversing and repairing that mutation. And so, yeah, you can be afraid of all these vaccines, but guess what? I'll go, if I have to get forced vaccinated, I will. And then guess what? I'll take the J juice, my jilly juice, dilute the antibodies, and fix the mutation from that initial homeostasis interruption. That's how you fight against the system that does cater to the lowest common denominator. There are people that do not take care of themselves. There are people that are very highly mutated and will be sick for freaking months, like this guy who came down with the measles from an exposure because his body is weak. He couldn't fight it off long enough and fast enough, and he ended up in the hospital. And since we can't legislate morals, we can't force people to take care of themselves, then they have to do the next best thing, give you a weakened version of that pathogen. And so that way you have some kind of immunity. Yes, you're going to suffer a mutation, but guess what? relative to how that mutation manifests is relative to your knowledge or ignorance of how to counter those types of pathogens through no fault of your own. Yeah, even walking down the street, I can have a guy just breathe on me, give me some weird pathogen, and then my ignorance or knowledge will then be the outcome. And that's the difference in who you have sex with. When you have sex with different people, you don't know what it is that you're taking on. You're taking on antibodies, taking on mutations from other people that you have no idea. And then when you come down with the disease, you're like, oh, well, I just had sex with you, I can blame you. Or maybe you can, since you are getting older, as you get older and you're not regenerating the cells, you're not getting healthier, then those antibodies in your body that have been swimming around for years that you've picked up along the way, they'll come to surface and cause inflammation. And then who are you going to blame? You're not going to trace back to every single person in every single situation and say, hey, give me a titer test to see if you were the one that gave me that milk allergy, or if you're the one that gave me that STD, or if you're the one that gave me this autoimmune disorder. Okay, so there should be no fear if you understand jilly juice. Jilly juice is the countering force. It is the one that levels the playing field. So you don't have to react like these people are reacting, and it's going to be insane. So now more than ever, you should be doing jilly juice and understanding the method behind this madness. Because now I am ultimately free. Those that are fearful, like this person, that's like, oh my God, call your Senate. That's a slave. When you have to beg somebody to put through legislation or not put through legislation, that is a slave mentality. A free person would understand the chemistry that's involved and can counter what somebody else is trying to do to them and still be able to survive that action against your body in whatever manner. Okay? Public health is a very slippery slope. And you're dealing with so many different people and their belief systems and everything else. There is no one way to do something out there when it comes to so many different people. But if you understand how your body works, and there is a one way of doing something that counters what people do to you, regardless. Okay, so when you understand balance within your own internal universe and you understand the chemistry that's involved and the biochemistry that's involved, then it doesn't matter if it's a vaccination, 5G, chemtrails, government conspiracies, GMO, glyphosate or glyphosate, whatever, pesticides. What else can I think of? Heavy metals, pollution, you name it. Every single pathogen that somebody has put out there that they're so fearful of, you won't have to worry about them because you understand how to counter all of those different fluctuating negative elements that may potentially cause an imbalance in your body. That's the difference, you guys. So yeah, if you're an anti-vaxxer and you're not doing J-juice, you should be very fearful because you're dealing with ignorance. And even you're a pro-vaxxer, no matter what, you're a pro-vaxxer and you're dealing with cancer, disease, and chronic illness, and you're not doing J-juice, you should be very, very afraid of the outcome. Because the more vaccines that you take on, the more that you're exposed to people and pathogens and all the stuff in the universe and everything else, all the different fluctuating elements, you are rapidly aging. The more sex partners you take on, the more whatever it is that you're taking on, and you're not countering and balancing, yeah, you should be afraid. You should be very afraid. So that's why J-juice levels the playing field. That's why J-juice is a universal protocol for all the different political parties and belief systems. Because we're dealing with a universal human body, a universal elements in the universe, periodic tables, and dealing with biochemistry. And if you don't understand any of those, then yes, you will always be subject to feeling like you're a slave, like someone's forcing something on you. We can't get away from living in this society. If you take part in our society where you are taking advantage of the creature comforts of the internet, of driving, of being able to voice your opinion, if you're taking part in all of that, then yes, there are conditions. If you're giving your kid to the system, if you're asking a doctor for advice and then you're not taking that doctor's advice, yes, CPS has every right to come and take your kid because you've said when you have asked a doctor for advice and you don't take their advice, you said, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. When you go to a doctor and you don't take their advice and you have a child and they're giving you a recommendation and then you're not taking their recommendation, CPS has every right to medically kidnap your child. You have to realize this. If you want to drive in our society, and they're saying that we have now major pathogens and cancer disease and chronic illness running rampant because of all these communicable diseases, and I want to drive in our society, I want to do all these different things, and their requirement is a vaccine, no, I don't love it. I don't love it. But you do what you got to do to take part in a society, and then you counter in your body the methods that they are imposing upon the general population because they have to cater to the lowest common denominator. When somebody has CPS come to their home, the reason why is because they called in some centralized force. When you have a relative, so that's one example that I've said before. When you're having a baby at home, okay? When you have a baby at home, because you don't want to go to the hospital, go to the doctor, to then risk a vaccination being given to your kid without your consent, and then somebody is concerned in your family that the whole being born wasn't over, that it wasn't taken care of the right way, or they were just concerned about that whole process, the birthing process. Thank you, jeez. Okay, they call the ambulance. The ambulance comes out and makes sure that everything's okay. So now you have a centralized force that came to your house, even if you didn't call them, but somebody else did, which means somebody knows your business in your world, and you're telling your business to everybody. So somebody called an ambulance, they come to the house, and they're like, okay, we see that you're a midwife, but somebody was concerned in your family, so we're here, and we recommend you take this baby to the hospital to make sure that all the vital organs and signs are okay. And the person doesn't do that. Yes, that ambulance person that was called in to make sure everything was okay has every right to call CPS, because when somebody calls CPS, they don't think that you know what the hell you're doing. When you ask advice to a doctor, a pediatrician, a nurse, and you don't take their advice, they have every right to come in and say, okay, you're not taking our advice because you already said that you don't know what you're doing, and you're asking us for advice, you're not taking it. We have every right to come in because we don't know what else that you're doing or not doing. We don't. When you exemplify ignorance and then you don't take people's advice, then the state has every right to come in and take your stuff and take your kids. Okay, so that's pretty cut and dry. That's very cut and dry. So if you're going to have kids in this society, you better know the laws. You better know the rules. Don't be coming from these platforms on Facebook thinking that, oh yeah, I'm just going to buck the system and be anti-government, anti-this, anti-that, and try to take a stand without understanding the repercussions. Yes, we have people that abuse children. We need to have a centralized force to make sure that these people go to jail and the kids get taken out of that home to go into another home. Now, where they end up in what foster home, that's out of my control, and that's not even the point. But the point is, we have people in our society that do not take care of their kids correctly. We have kids running around outside with no supervision. You see all over Facebook, there's this kid that was running around in Cleveland last night. The parents were probably doing drugs. And they're like, hey, does anybody know who this kid belongs to? Because they were wandering around the streets of Cleveland. So what do you think? Okay. So, so this is how the world works. Once you know the laws, you won't believe all the stories and you'll act accordingly. If you know the laws of your body and the laws of chemistry, the laws of biochemistry, nothing out there is going to affect you if you know the laws. If you don't know the laws, you will be fearful of every single thing and every single thing around you, and then you're going to think somebody's taking advantage of you. If you're in imminent danger, if somebody is coming to your house trying to break down your door, you have every right to fight back. We have protection laws where if you have a gun or you have something and someone's in your house and you're afraid for your life, there are allowances for self-defense. Okay? But anything outside of your property and your home, you don't have a right to go and impose your view on somebody. If the vaccines were deadly, they wouldn't give them out. But you as a parent and you as a human has to understand antibody acquisition. And if you are already at a deficit, already suffering from some kind of cancer disease and chronic illness, then your doctor would have already said that you deserve a medical exemption. You are not a candidate for a vaccine. You can't afford the antibody overload. Or they want to spread them apart so you're not getting such a huge amount of antigen that turns into antibodies, which then would shut the body down, which is what happens when you get a blood transfusion from an AB positive person to an O negative person. So your doctor, and then if somebody dies from a vaccine, that's where that slush fund comes from. That's where all of those lawsuits come from, is somebody wasn't adequately tested enough to see if they were a candidate for this vaccine, and it was forced upon them. Without being properly tested. Okay, so this is for you, Aaron Allen Blank, and for all of these. Okay, you guys, do the J juice. Do the J juice. I understand, Aaron, they do that, but here's the thing. When someone forces it upon you without doing the proper testing, that's where you have recourse to then sue them if they didn't do the proper testing, but you have to know to understand the laws. Okay, so if you understand the laws, then you will force your doctor to make sure that this baby or you can handle a vaccine. And that's understanding titer tests. When you do a titer test, that'll tell you exactly how many antibodies that are present. If you are positive for the measles antibody, that says that you are within the conditions of what a positive would be, which would probably be satisfactory to the government regulations. But you have to know how to do this first. Do a titer test to see where you are. If you test negative for the MMR, if you test negative for that, then obviously you have to be exposed to satisfy government requirements. And then you act accordingly. And then you do J juice to then dilute the antibodies. Because already getting the vaccine is proof enough for the government to know that you're protected. Now what you do afterwards is all up to you. Okay, so if you want to be savvy in this system and in this world, you have to know the resources and the laws and understand the laws of the human body as well as the laws of the land, or you're going to be reacting and fearful of everything. Yeah, I know, Aaron, but that's their own problem, Aaron Allen Blank. That's their own problem. It's not your problem. Actually, what you can do, Aaron, is you can educate your friends and your people, but you don't have control over people who don't know this. You can't help the next guy down the street that doesn't know this, that got forced vaccinated. You can't. But if you want to do 100% in educating your friends and family, let them know. Do a titer test first to see where you are, and then see if a homeoprophylaxis and something else is appropriate to satisfy government requirements. That's what it comes down to, is understanding what they're looking for, and then you know that you have recourse. And we know we can't save everybody. We really can't. You know you can't, and it sucks because there are people out there that are very severely mutated, that are on the deathbed dying, and there's nothing that you can do. They're already, fixed on their programming. So you just say, hey, this is what not to do. Here's an example of somebody that let their body go and gave their body to the system without understanding the laws of their own body. Do you want to end up like this person? Or do you want to actually have control? That's the only way that you can utilize people that don't understand, that are ignorant, that you can't reach. Okay? I know, and it sucks. Really, Aaron, I completely understand. I understand the frustration, the feeling of helplessness, but it comes down to every man for himself, or learn the argument so well that you can reach people just like that. That you can reach people just like that. And it does take time. It does take, first of all, doing the J juice, because that's going to clear away all the distractions so you can get and fine tune the finer points of the argument, so you don't have to do 1,000 different videos like I have to get the point across. Okay? It's not about being anti-vax or pro-vax. So those of you that are still passing along all those crazy articles about being anti-vax and pro-vax, you need to be pro-jilly juice. No matter what. The doctors, all of you too. The doctors will tell a person whether or not they are appropriate. When you get a titer test and you already show that you're positive for the MMR, then you're home free. You don't have to get the vaccine. You have a titer. But if you show that you're negative for the MMR, and then also too, the government regulations say you got to have the measles vaccine, and they won't probably say which strain, or they might. It might say like, you know, IgA-E. You got to have IgA-E, which is immunoglobulin, da da da. I forget the A stands for. And it'll have like a letter of the alphabet or some kind of code or number that says what that, and that references as a type of antibody, a type of immunoglobulin. Okay, so when you go get a titer test, you then look for it and say, I want a titer test for this immunoglobulin E. And then you get that titer test. They'll say, oh yeah, you're positive. Great, you don't have to get the vaccine. You're home free. Submit that for your government requirements, and everything is wonderful. I can bet you right now at this point, if I do a titer test, I'll probably come up negative, which means that whatever vaccination they may require, if it comes down to that, to renew a driver's license, whatever vaccinations are required, I'll get them if it comes down to that. And I don't even have to do a titer test, because I know once I get the vaccine, I'm going to have the antibodies. And they know it too. Or if there's a way to say that I bought the vaccine, or I don't know, you got to get the vaccine in order to get a receipt for it. But hey, let's say homeoprophylaxis. Let's say just having the prescription, just buying the prescription of the homeoprophylaxis is enough. Or they will actually want to see the proof of the actual antibody in your body. So it just all depends on how they want the proof submitted to them, if it comes down to that. But remember, we have to predict these scenarios so we know how to put, plan A, plan B, plan C together. You got to know how to do the plan A, plan B, plan C. So it's about strategy. J-Juice will give you strategy so you can still maintain an existence in the world that you live in that deals with so many different belief systems and medical situations. So no one's blaming you for being a carrier. I mean, when a guy, like the other day, this guy, this article was talking about this guy from a year ago was under quarantine for the measles. And even the police knew who he was. This is out of Brookfield, Wisconsin. And the police even know him. So I'm like, oh my God, this is so weird. Why would the police know who this guy was? But I guess this guy was under quarantine for the measles. He was in his house for a month. He decided to break his quarantine, and he goes to the gym, and he elicits his wife's help to do that. Like he hid in his car or I don't know what. And then I guess the policeman or some law enforcement saw that he was out, and they arrested him for breaking quarantine and going to the gym, no less. I'm like, what scenario would have happened? What factors, what scenarios would have had to have happened for this guy to be arrested for breaking quarantine, which means that he went to the doctor, then the doctors or something then told law enforcement, this guy needs to be quarantined. He is not allowed to be in public. Holy crap. That was like in 2017. So this whole thing with the pathogens and the antivax and the provax argument, all of these different diseases and care, and it's coming to a head, guys. So you now have to be proactive and understand what the arguments are and how to counter them. And if you are severely mutated, it doesn't matter if you get the vaccine or not. Yeah, you'll be exposed to the shedding, like Kevin was saying, which we all know shedding happens. But that's not even the point. Now you have to understand, if you do get exposed to shedding, which we all know people have been, hence why we have all these different people getting sick. Okay, you get a titer test. You see where you are relative to the government regulations. Because there's regulations in the EPA, there's regulations in businesses and industries Well, there's going to be a general population regulation when it comes to antibodies and protection and sickness. What are you going to do? Yeah, Connie. You got 3 different strains. Get a titer test, Connie. Y'all should get a titer test. I know, I mean, if it comes down to it where I'm required to show proof of immunity to my local law enforcement or my local government, then I'll get a titer test and play that. I'll do it for whatever specific strains that they're looking for. And hopefully they don't do blood. Hopefully it's like spit or something. So I don't want to do a freaking needle. Oh my God. And then, and then I can see my blood type. They say, hey, test for my blood. Well, no, never mind. You can't do blood type with the spit. I'm a dork. But yeah, if you got the measles 3 times, it's because, it's a different strain. Because if you already had the measles once, then, you're being exposed to the same strain. You have the antibodies will come to surface and attack it. And maybe, hey, if you've been around, well, yeah, no, because supposedly the whole thing is that when I had the chicken pox when I was a kid. I had a lot of the chicken pox. And I've been around people with chicken pox, even shingles. But I think shingles is a derivative of the chicken pox. I haven't had shingles, but then I also, whatever antigen that may have been swimming around in my body, it could have turned into shingles. Maybe having the antibody of the chicken pox would have potentially turned into shingles at a later date if I wasn't doing jilly juice. But now my body is so strategic, profound, and so on point that all the antibodies that I ever had been exposed to, all the antigen turned into antibodies, well, yeah, they're not going to come to surface because they're all diluted. They're not going to be a problem. Antibodies that come to surface and accumulate and turn into cancer, disease, and chronic illness and rapid aging is because you're not countering and balancing the antibodies and the cancer or the candida, and you're not balancing your hormones correctly. But no, I'm not afraid of any of the forced vaccinations. The ones that are afraid of forced vaccinations because they don't understand their body or how to counter it. And they don't understand the legislation behind why. We are seeing our society who doesn't take care of themselves and understand strategic nutrition deteriorate. And when you see a coal miner going into the coal mines and they're not doing strategic nutrition, they're eating yucky food all the time, they're not reinforcing their nutrition and all that, and they're getting exposed to coal dust, and then they contract tuberculosis because that's the inflammation that happens because that is a pathogen. And then you have antibodies that are created from that pathogen, and then inflammation happens, and then that's when you're contagious. And so that's no different than that guy that was put in quarantine for the measles. Okay? He didn't have a strong, reinforced body to then be able to handle that exposure to the measles or exposure to coal dust turning into tuberculosis. Okay? So they are pathogenic for over a month. You know how many people you can infect because of how long you've been sick? You can infect a whole population. You could potentially take down a whole population. You take someone that's been sick for a month or 2 months in major contagious stage and put them on that island with a bunch of natives, they would decimate that whole island of natives that have never been exposed to those pathogens. Now, this lady that did send me an email who's from Vietnam and sent me about the whole thing with the vaccines. I get it. And here's the thing. When you come from a different country and you get vaccinated, it's because it's a transition process. It's an assimilation process. I understand the concepts behind it. What really we need to look at is from strategic nutrition. But since we can't legislate morals, and now I understand where she's coming from, Doesn't mean I agree with it, but I understand where she's coming from. We can't legislate morals and force somebody to take in strategic nutrition. We can't. To then be able to handle exposure without going to vaccines. If we can force every person, every immigrant to come to America and take jilly juice and deal with the mutations and purge out the excess antibodies and purge out the excess antigen and fix all their mutations, and they come into our country completely revitalized and reinforced in so many different ways, and they get exposed to all the different pathogens, their recovery time was so much quicker, they won't be so pathogenic, and they'll be fine. They know that if they get sick, it's because they were exposed to a pathogen their body didn't recognize, but the recovery time would be that much quicker. The fact that that guy that was quarantined for over a month, it was getting stir crazy, the fact that he didn't have strategic nutrition reinforced, he was getting stir crazy, was still very pathogenic in his state of his body. It took him way longer to heal and then fix the mutation, which it doesn't really happen because he's not doing J juice or taking strategic nutrition. So yeah, he went out there and infected probably a bunch of people, which then they could hold him accountable. No different than holding somebody that's HIV positive accountable. When you're testing positive for HIV, it means that you have a lot of antibodies that makes you contagious. If you're testing negative for HIV, it means that you don't have, maybe you still have the antibody, but you don't have as much to be contagious, to be a weapon against a community. That's where it comes from. So when you test positive for a disease, it means you have a lot of antibodies that could either be shedding an infection stage or protection. And the medical community knows the difference between the two. And when you test negative, it means that it's not going to be a problem for you or for anybody else. But it's how much is present is what makes you infectious and contagious. And then that's when inflammation happens. And that's when you're supposed to be at home, not infecting the entire population. See, it's all about the balance and what the different guidelines are to what makes you contagious or what makes you positive and negative. Because every single time you're exposed to an antigen, it creates an antibody. You can never get rid of the antibody, but you can control how much or how little. And it's based upon all the different biochemistries. So now, you guys, no fear, do the jilly juice. If you don't know jilly juice, then yes, you're going to live in fear, you're going to fight, and then you're going to lose. You're going to lose. Because you don't know the laws. You're believing all the stories. So that's why I say get away from the anti-vax, pro-vax stance. Come from the jilly juice stance. So no matter what kind of legislation they put through out there in the federal government, you can still counter what they do to cater to the lowest common denominator. You cannot legislate morals. No different than you can say stop doing drugs, stop drinking alcohol. But we can find a way to control the negative consequences of somebody crossing the line. You know, you're supposed to have a certain kind of BAC level to be then deemed as drunk. So you can have a little bit of alcohol in your body, but if it goes above 0.08, then you are altered state. It doesn't mean that, you know, you can't have any alcohol in your body. It just means that if you have a certain point of alcohol or so much in your system, just like antibodies, when you do a drug test, if you have so many antibodies in your body because you did drugs, then that shows you're in an altered state. You can't drive, and then you get a ticket or you go to jail or whatever the repercussions are. Okay? So, wow. But remember, strategy. It's all about strategy, guys. If you're reactive and you're hormonal, you're on a death trajectory. It doesn't matter what happens. You fight the system, you're not going to win. You have to understand why the system exists to begin with and be strategic on how you play the system. Because they're not out to get you. The system is not out to get you. The system has to deal with so many different people. And again, they cater to the lowest common denominator. Don't be that lowest common denominator they have to cater to. As soon as you become very vocal in your anti-government beliefs, you are now a target. And they will be watching you. And the more that you fight, the more they are focusing on you. the more that they are going to then pay attention to every single thing that you do, and then someone's going to call CPS on you to make sure that you know what the hell you're doing. Because some people are so reactive that what happens is that their animals and their children are now victims of someone's hormonal imbalance. When that guy that was hoarding, such a major imbalance, he's anti-government, total conspiracy theorist, and hoarding, a hoarder, he had animals. He had calls them his children that were in cages in his house, in cages, in feces all the way up to here. And the government was like, hey, we got to take away these animals because they're not being taken care of because of your mental imbalance. I'm glad my government was there to take away those animals from that guy that was mentally imbalanced, because he thought that, you know, having these animals in a cage under like 10, 15 pounds, 1,000 pounds of garbage was something good. No. People who are very imbalanced will victimize their children and victimize their animals because they don't know any better, because they're in the wrong context. So you have to understand balance, understand context, and realize there's a reasoning behind the whole vaccine thing. And the drum beats are getting louder, and it's not going away. And you're going to watch your friends try to fight so hard against something that they have no control over. And you're going to see arrests happen. You're going to see people's kids getting taken away because they don't understand. They don't understand the reasoning behind it because they are in reactive hormonal mode. Don't be like those guys. Understand jilly juice, understand chemistry, understand the reasoning behind jilly juice. Understand why it is I have been flipping so much lately. I have been gaining revelation after revelation after revelation, and now I'm back to center, and it's weird, but I'm taking it up a notch. Not only do I understand why we have legislation, why we do have these different government agencies, now I'm saying, let's not look and expect death. I understand balance and catering to the lowest common denominator, but the outcome should be continuous, indefinite life, not death. Here's why. But I completely understand why it is you're doing the vaccines. I completely understand why you have the FDA, and I completely understand why we have the EPA and the USDA and the, I don't know, another government ABC agency. I understand. Doesn't mean I love it, but I understand the reasoning behind it. And I understand why it is that they can't prohibit prescription drugs. No different than the way you can't prohibit alcohol. There's always going to be a market, but somebody has to regulate it so somebody doesn't die. That's why I was being targeted for a minute when I rolled this out. They wanted to make sure that this stuff wasn't dangerous. And I had to go and prove it. They realized when I got it tested that it was a probiotic, it's not an antibiotic, by an independent agency. And they said, hey, the probiotics were too numerous to count. They had to dilute my recipe to be able to count the lactobacillus, the probiotic strains that is life-giving to the human body. So it turned out to be 13 million